Okay guys, so the next conversation we need to have is that of exercise selection. So when you're writing your own program or a program for somebody else, after we've decided how long their block of training is going to be, we've decided what we're going to prioritize in each session, we've then sort of thought about how much volume an individual can tolerate. Next, we want to think about exercise selection, okay? So when it comes to exercise selection, in my opinion, there are about half a dozen major categories. Now, don't get me wrong, there are a million different hypothetical scenarios that I can go over and different examples I can give you, but we would literally be here all day. Now, all of these are minor considerations, in my opinion, that fall under the 6 or so major categories. So we're going to break them down. The first one is goals. Now, this one is a little bit spread out, but goals, obviously, this just describes what the person's objective or main objective in their training is. So let's say, for example, they are a power lifter, then obviously their program is going to need to feature squat, bench press, and deadlift because that holds the highest amount of specificity to what they will be performing in competition, because it literally is what they perform in competition. There is no replacement for those. Now, you can even open that conversation a little bit further and say that their exercises outside of squat, bench, and deadlift might need to supplement their squat, bench, and deadlift, even from a technique standpoint, to clean up weaknesses, strength imbalances, or anything like that. Give whatever example you like. Even their supplementary or their accessory exercises must hold some level of specificity to what they're trying to do, obviously. Now, on the other hand, you might get somebody whose goal is specifically physique development or hypertrophy, in which no exercise is technically essential. I could make the argument that some exercises should be more commonly featured in the average person's program, more commonly than some others, but we won't get into that. Essentially, no exercises essential for somebody who is pursuing hypertrophy. So again, goals is a major consideration. Now, the next one on the list is skill. Now, skill, I mean from a technique standpoint. And yes, you could absolutely say that if somebody doesn't know how to perform a barbell squat, then you should damn well teach them how to do a barbell squat. And that is half a valid argument. They could have a major benefit from learning how to do that. But you could also spend a lot of time with an individual cleaning up certain confidence barriers and skill deficits and potentially mobility limitations and a number of other things that if you're in a situation where that person or yourself just needs some momentum, they just need to start seeing some progress, even just psychologically, it's really going to benefit their adherence and consistency. And alternatively to that, you might even find that you're in a rush. Let's say you've only got 2 more months of your off season. You're trying to pack on as much muscle as possible before you start your prep for a competition. Whatever reason, if you need to make progress ASAP, then wasting months on end trying to learn all these intricate movements that you aren't familiar with might be a bit of a waste of time. Yes, you can make an argument for those being weaknesses, therefore you should work on them, but sometimes you can just do something else and get the same benefit. So, skill is another major consideration. Next, and almost very similar to what I just described, mobility. You can spend a really long time improving someone's mobility so they can reach, appropriate depth in a squat. Or you can just get straight on the hack squat, get them super confident, squatting all the way down, ass to grass, and getting a ton more out of the exercise. Now, I'm not saying one is right or wrong, but again, if you're just trying to build some momentum and just have someone enjoy the process and see progress for whatever reason, then you might just want to stick to the hack squat for a while. And this doesn't mean to say that on the side, you can also be improving their mobility, so in the future they can barbell squat. But mobility or potential limitations would also be something that you would want to take into consideration. Now next, and again very similar, is confidence. I've had plenty of clients in the past who are beginners, and I just know that they have watched the leg press video where someone bends their legs backwards and they're going to be terrified of doing it. Do you really think that individual is going to jump on a leg press and get the most out of the exercise and push themselves to failure? No. Now, you can absolutely make the argument that they should get confident and they should break past these barriers, and that's a very good argument in most cases. But again, you might assess the individual and choose that that's just not the best route. So confidence is a genuine thing. I've also had many people in the past, say for example, I've got one gentleman who's extremely strong and has trained for about 20 years, but has just never liked squats. Always run into injuries, has had a bad history with them, never got on with them, has seen progress, but it's been very stop and start, has always been a little bit intimidated by them, and they don't actually need to do them. And actually, any other movement, put them on a Smith machine, put them on a hack squat, would do at least a very similar job, or as close to as is reasonably worth arguing about. And they'll get far more out of it. So genuinely, sometimes confidence is something you want to account for as well. Now next, might seem a little bit obvious, is pain or injuries. Now if someone can't do an exercise because it hurts, guess what? They shouldn't do that exercise. And in most cases, say for example, if someone is experiencing, say, a pathological breakdown of tendon tissue in their knee, their patella tendon, for example, then continuing to do the exercise in the same way, in the same style, as aggressively as usual, that is causing that pathological breakdown, you guessed it, will make that worse. So it's definitely a good thing to take into consideration. You don't want to be in pain when you're training. You might want to be in some level of discomfort and muscular stress, but actual injury related pain is it's not good. So that's the next thing. Now, last on the list is muscle lengths. Now I put this one, it's definitely last because it's definitely the least important out of these. But there's a lot of research these days to show that placing the greatest amount of tension where the muscle is essentially stretched out in the movements from a biomechanical standpoint typically yields much greater hypertrophy response than if you're placing the greatest amount of tension in the shortened range, okay? So say for example, you're gonna do a lunge where you step out in front of you and you've got the weights in your hands, and as you descend, your glutes get stretched out, but at the same time they're under the most amount of tension because gravity is pulling down and your muscles are in that deep stretch position at the very bottom. Now, on the other hand, you've got things like a hip thrust, again, a glute exercise, where some people might think it's better because they really feel it, but actually you can see that the most amount of tension is at the top, because when you hip thrust up and your muscles are short, that's when they're short in range, that's where the greatest amount of tension is, because gravity is pulling the bar down and is having more of an effect at the top, okay? There's long explanations as to why those two are different from a biomechanical standpoint with different moment arms and everything like that, which we certainly will not get into in this video. But essentially, my example is one exercise is for the glutes and the quads, and it challenges the muscle primarily in the lengthen range, whereas one is in the shorten range, and you might want to take into consideration what muscle lengths or muscle ranges you are trying to get an individual to target in their program. Now, I'm not saying that you should always go for the lengthen range and avoid the shorten range, but say for example, you're going to sequence exercises in a way that you're going to choose, say, 2 glute exercises back to back. Now, if we know that their goal is hypertrophy, and we know that challenging a muscle in the lengthen range will yield better hypertrophy results, then specific to the goal, we want to be the most fresh for the exercise that places the glutes under the greatest tension while they're under a deep stretch. You might want to program lunges first. Now, this doesn't mean that you only need to program lunges. We can also program hip thrusts as well that challenges in the shortened range, but you might just want to sequence that second. So it's little things like this you might want to take into consideration. Exercise selection, and then, as I'll talk about in my next topic, the sequencing in which we place them might be a major consideration as well. So, muscle lengths. When I'm designing a client's program, if I need them to be resilient to injuries and they're a runner, I might want to challenge their calf muscle in a deep stretch position in order to make it more injury resilient, okay? So it's not just muscles that develop the best when they're placed under a lot of tension under a deep stretch position. Typically it's connective tissues as well, tendons and the likes of that, okay? So again, specific to someone's goals, if they're a runner, for example, you might want to look at where muscles are typically injured the most, and you might want to strengthen that muscle length or that position as much as possible. Again, feeding into exercise selection, which exercises are going to challenge muscles in specific lengths is a consideration. So it's not all just about hypertrophy in that sense, okay? So no matter what your goal is, we need to figure out what suits that goal the best first. And then from there, usually in a similar order to this, although there's no sweet science, we want to take into consideration all of these things, and we want to pick exercises out of the many, many different exercises that would do the job, and you need to plug it into the program with the appropriate volume in which I discussed in my previous video. Now, I do want to just also extend this conversation ever so slightly with one final point. If you're a coach and you're programming for a client, or you're programming for a friend, or anything like that, or even programming for yourself and you're not a coach, whoever you are, if you're writing a program, exercise selection is something that people spend far too much time on, and usually there's loads of perfect exercises for a unique scenario. And you can get bogged down trying to find the magic one. In fact, there are loads that would do pretty much the same job, and you need to have some sort of logical processing in terms of selecting exercises, but you certainly don't need to be getting stressed out to the point where it's unnecessary. So that's it in closing. Hope this helps. I'll see you in the next one.